"Don't move, follow me." The voice was barely a whisper, barely anything at all. But Kim Dong-woo stopped. He had been mid-stride across his own gravel driveway, phone pressed to his ear, a hostile acquisition already unfolding across the ocean. His armored limousine idled at the base of the steps. His driver stood beside the open rear door, waiting. Everything was exactly as it always was. He looked down. She had appeared from behind the stone garden planter, a small girl in a faded denim jacket over a bright yellow dress, cornrows adorned with clear beads catching the last copper light of the sun. A weathered leather book was pressed flat against her chest like something she refused to lose. He recognized her vaguely, the quiet girl from the neighborhood, a nobody, a background detail. Her deep-set eyes held his with a certainty that felt ancient and entirely wrong for a face that young. "The man in the driver's seat," she whispered, "is not your man. The contract on your head was signed by your own brother 1 hour ago." Dong-woo's eyes cut toward the driveway. The driver turned his head slightly, and Dong-woo realized he had never seen that face before in his life. If you believe that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one no one is watching, then you are exactly where you need to be. Welcome to Toni's Mafia stories, where the quiet ones always win. He moved before he thought about it. One hand shot out, gripping Martina's small shoulder, steering her away from the driveway at a pace that looked casual to anyone watching. And someone was always watching. They slipped through the iron side gate, cut across the dead lot behind the old bodega, and didn't stop until the thick brick wall of the abandoned church rose up behind them and swallowed them whole in its shadow. Dong-woo turned on her immediately. "Who sent you?" It wasn't a question. His voice was low and controlled, the way a blade is controlled, flat, precise, and capable of tremendous damage. "Who put you up to this? Give me a name." Martina said nothing. She sat down on a broken concrete ledge, set the ledger across her knees, and opened it. He almost laughed, then he looked at the pages. Column after column of meticulous handwriting filled every line: dates, vehicle codes, cargo weights, arrival windows, names written in both English and perfect formal Korean characters. Not approximations, not guesses. The actual operational shorthand his logistics coordinators used internally. Codes that existed in exactly 3 places in the world: his encrypted servers, his senior enforcers, and apparently this book. "My grandmother ran the dry cleaners on Halsted," Martina said, her voice carrying the quiet of someone reciting something they have rehearsed 10,000 times alone. "Your men came every week. They thought she was just a woman pressing shirts." She turned a page without looking up. She was also reading every word they said. Dong-woo's jaw tightened. "She taught me the patterns," Martina continued. "The codes match the shipping manifests at the South Dock. I've been cross-referencing them for 2 years. She said it the way a child might say I've been practicing piano, plainly, without performance, which made it somehow worse. He stared at the Korean characters rendered in a child's careful hand and felt something shift beneath him, the way ground shifts just before it gives. Then a thought arrived that he didn't want. If she has been watching for 2 years, what else has she seen that she hasn't told him yet? "Last night," Martina said, as if she had heard the question form in his mind, "your brother met a man under the street lamp across from my window. They traded a black briefcase." She paused. "The man your brother paid is the one your people use to make things look like accidents." The brick wall behind Dong-woo seemed to press closer. She turned to a page near the back of the ledger. A single line. A license plate number, the exact sequence he had memorized years ago, assigned permanently to his personal limousine. Beneath it, written in the same careful hand, was a single word. Execution. For a long moment, Dong-woo simply stared at that word. Then he straightened up, smoothed the front of his jacket with both hands, and did what men like him always do when the ground disappears beneath them. He reached for contempt. "You want a negotiation," he said slowly, as if tasting something sour. "A child in an alley wants to negotiate with me." The laugh that followed was short and without warmth. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Martina closed the ledger. "I know exactly who you are," she said. "I've been reading your life for 2 years." She set the book carefully on her knee. "I'll get you out of this city tonight. Every route, every safe passage, I know them all. My grandmother walked them before I could read." She looked up at him then, fully, without apology. "But when this is over, you pull your syndicate out of this neighborhood. Every front business, every crew, every hand you have in the harbor contracts. And you rebuild the community center. Your men burned down on Prospect Avenue." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Dongwoo looked at her, this small girl in a yellow dress sitting on broken concrete in the shadow of a condemned church, and something behind his eyes flickered between fury and disbelief. He had sat across from presidents. He had made generals flinch. And now a child from a neighborhood he had marked for acquisition was listing her terms. He laughed again, longer this time, and the sound of it bounced off the brick walls with an ugliness he didn't bother to conceal. Martina waited until he was finished. Then she stood up, tucked the ledger under her arm, and said very quietly, "You're welcome to walk back to your car." The laughter stopped. "Your empire is already coming apart," she continued, and there was no cruelty in it, only the particular steadiness of someone telling the truth they have carried alone for a long time. "Not because your brother outsmarted you, because you spent years looking right past the people who could see you clearest. My grandmother saw everything. I see everything." She paused. "That's what happens when powerful men decide certain people aren't worth noticing." Something moved across Dongwoo's face that he would never have permitted anyone to witness in any boardroom on Earth. It wasn't anger. It was the specific, nauseating recognition of a man realizing he has been outplayed, and by exactly the kind of person he taught himself never to fear. He thought about what she hadn't yet told him, and that thought was what finally broke him. He gave one slow nod. "Lead the way." "If you believe no one should ever underestimate the wisdom of a quiet child, smash that like button right now, because this prideful billionaire is about to find out just how much he missed." Martina stepped into the narrow alleyway. Dongwoo followed. Then a black SUV tore around the far corner, its headlights flooding the alley like two merciless eyes locking directly onto them. Martina was already moving. She grabbed his sleeve and pulled him hard left, through a gap in the brick wall so narrow Dongwoo had to turn sideways to fit. And then they were running, down a concrete slope, through a rusted metal door she shouldered open without breaking stride, and into the dark belly of a basement that smelled of old motor oil and decades of quiet use. The SUV's headlights swept the alley above them and found nothing. She didn't stop. She navigated the dark by memory, one hand trailing the wall, her beads the only sound between them, that soft, rhythmic clicking that Dongwoo was already learning to follow like a signal. They moved through a tunnel that had once connected two jazz clubs, its walls still wearing faded posters of men in wide-lapel suits who had been dead for 50 years. Then up through a boiler room, across a church annex, and out onto a side street through a door disguised as a section of fence. Dongwoo was sweating through his bespoke suit. He, who had not run from anything in 20 years, was running behind a 10-year-old girl and struggling to keep pace. On the corner ahead, an older woman sat on her porch in the blue evening air, a sweater across her shoulders, watching the street the way women of a certain age and experience watch everything completely and without appearing to. As Martina passed, the woman gave a single, unhurried nod. Nothing more. Martina nodded back. Half a block later, when 3 of Dongwoo's brother's scouts rounded the far end of the street, that same woman called out to them in a carrying voice, pointing in the exact opposite direction with absolute conviction. The scouts ran where she pointed. It happened twice more before Dongwoo understood what he was seeing. A woman hanging laundry who repositioned herself to block a sightline. An elderly man walking a dog who slowed to a stop at precisely the right intersection, forcing a pursuing vehicle to brake and lose momentum. None of them spoke to each other. None of them appeared to coordinate. They simply moved, with the quiet precision of people who had been protecting this particular stretch of earth long before anyone thought to ask them to. He found himself wondering, for the first time, how long this network had existed. How many times it had operated without a single soul like him ever noticing. That thought hadn't finished forming when Martina stopped. They were at the end of a long maintenance tunnel beneath the old district waterworks, and the exit ahead was gated. A heavy iron door secured with a padlock that had not been opened recently and would not be opened quickly. Behind them, from somewhere back in the tunnel's dark throat, came the unmistakable sound of heavy boots on concrete. More than one pair, moving with purpose. Getting closer. Martina was already crouching at the base of the gate. She wedged a rusted iron pipe she'd lifted from the tunnel floor into the gap between the latch housing and the frame, angled it the way her grandmother must have shown her, with the particular geometry of someone who had learned that a woman without a key still finds a way through. She leaned her small body weight into it once, twice, and on the third push, the latch gave with a dull, exhausted clank. The gate swung open just as the first flashlight beam swept the tunnel wall 30 feet behind them. They were through it and gone before the light found their shadows. The bakery entrance was a plain door in a plain wall on a plain street, and Martina's aunt opened it before they knocked, which told Dongwoo everything he needed to know about how long this woman had been expecting trouble to arrive at her door and how little it frightened her. She was stout and unhurried, with the bearing of someone who had decided long ago what she stood for and had not revisited the question since. She looked at Dongwoo the way you look at weather, nodding it, neither welcoming nor alarmed, and stepped aside to let them in. The kitchen smelled of butter and warm bread and something deeper beneath it, something that reminded Dongwoo, against his will, of his mother's house. He borrowed a burner phone and moved to the far corner, already mentally rebuilding his escape. He called his chief financial officer. No answer. He called his head of security, straight to voicemail. He pulled up his primary accounts through a back-channel portal and sat very still for a moment, looking at the screen. Frozen, all of it. Every account, every reserve, every liquid asset he could reach from this city, gone behind walls he didn't build and couldn't move. He set the phone down on the flour-dusted counter and said nothing. Martina's aunt set a plate of cornbread in front of him without being asked, the way certain women feed people not out of warmth for the person, but out of the conviction that no crisis is navigated well on an empty stomach. He didn't touch it. Then, after a moment, he did. He found himself wondering why the aunt didn't seem afraid of him, not even slightly, and whether she had always known this night was coming. Martina sat across from him, her hands folded over the ledger. "She didn't die in an accident," she said. No preamble, no softening. "Your brother sent men to her door because she wouldn't sign the property deed over. She told them no, so they burned the building down while she was still inside it." The kitchen was very quiet. Dongwoo looked at the child across the table and felt something move through him that his pride had no name for. Then the borrowed phone lit up on the counter, an incoming video feed, unsolicited, from his own corporate headquarters. On the screen, his brother sat behind Dongwoo's executive desk, a crystal glass raised in a slow, satisfied toast to no one in particular. Dongwoo stared at the screen until his brother raised the glass to his lips, and then he turned it face down on the counter, because there are certain things a man cannot watch without losing something he cannot get back. "He thinks it's over," Dongwoo said, not to Martina, to himself. "It is over," Martina replied. "For him." Something in her voice made him look up. She had opened the ledger again, but this time she turned past the logistics columns, past the Korean characters, past the license plates and the dates and the names, all the way to the back, where the pages changed entirely. These were not notes. They were documents. Photocopied, carefully folded, pressed flat between the final pages with the patience of a woman who understood that the most important things must be kept where no one thinks to look. Dongwoo leaned forward. Legal stamps, notarized signatures, shell company filings going back 11 years. Each one layered beneath the next like the rings of a tree. His eyes moved across the pages, and his mind, which was a precise and formidable instrument, began assembling the picture before he was ready to see it. The harbor development. The port expansion his family had spent 4 years and hundreds of millions constructing their future upon. The land it required, all of it, every foundational parcel, traced back through a chain of holding companies to a single, quiet owner. a dry cleaner on Halsted Street. He sat back in his chair. She bought it, he said. The words felt foreign in his mouth. Your grandmother, she bought the land. Over 15 years, Martina said. Parcel by parcel. Every time your people tried to push this neighborhood out, she found a way to put her name on another piece of it. She didn't have money the way you have money. Martina's eyes were steady and without triumph. She had patience, and she had time, and she understood that if you own the ground, nobody can tell you to move. Dongwoo thought about his brother ordering the fire, and suddenly the logic of it rearranged itself into something far colder than grief. His brother hadn't wanted the neighborhood cleared simply for expansion. He had needed the matriarch gone because she was the one person whose signature could halt everything, and he had known, somehow, that the old woman would never sell. Which meant his brother had also known about the girl. He looked at Martina and asked the question quietly. How long has he known you have the ledger? Martina held his gaze, long enough that tonight wasn't an accident. The weight of that settled over the kitchen like a dropped stone. Then the front window of the bakery exploded inward in a cascade of glass and spinning light, and a flashbang grenade skipped twice across the tile floor before the whole world went white. Drop a comment right now with the word justice if you want to see Martina reclaim everything her grandmother died to protect, because this child is just getting started. The world came back in pieces, ringing silence, white smoke, the sharp smell of flash powder cutting through flour and butter. Dongwoo's hand moved before his mind cleared, reaching instinctively toward Martina's small frame the way a drowning man reaches for whatever is closest. And he is not proud, later, of what his instincts intended in that half-second of blindness. He never got the chance. The aunt was already moving. She came up from behind the counter with the calm, unhurried motion of a woman retrieving something she has kept ready for exactly this occasion, and the warning blast she fired through the ceiling was not panic. It was an announcement, a declaration of terms. The mercenaries flooding through the broken window scrambled backward over each other like men who had prepared for many things, and not for this particular grandmother. In the gap that created, Martina grabbed Dongwoo's sleeve. She pulled him through the back of the kitchen, past the cooling racks and the prep table, and straight down a laundry chute he would never have found on his own. A tight, dark drop that deposited them both onto a pile of flour sacks in a coal cellar beneath the building, the chute's cover swinging shut above them like a held breath finally released. Dark, still, the sounds of chaos above them muffled to distant thumping and shouting. Dongwoo sat on the flour sacks in his ruined suit and tried to locate his dignity. It took longer than he would have liked. He thought about his hand reaching for her. He thought about what he had intended, in that white, unguarded moment, to do with a child who had done nothing but save his life twice in the same evening. The shame of it didn't arrive loudly. It arrived the way truth usually arrives in a man like him, quietly and too late to be useful, and with the particular weight of something that cannot be unknown. He found himself wondering whether the aunt had seen it, whether she had already known, before he did, what kind of man he was at the bottom of everything. The cellar breathed around them. Somewhere above, a door slammed. He listened to Martina breathe beside him in the dark, slow, even entirely without fear, and her beads clicked once softly as she shifted her weight. Why? He asked, and his voice in the darkness sounded older than he intended. Didn't you just let him have me? Martina was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone searching for an answer, the quiet of someone deciding whether the person asking has earned it. My grandmother said that real royalty doesn't walk past an injustice, she said finally, even when it's happening to someone who deserves it. Dongwoo had nothing to say to that. He sat with it instead. Then, directly above them, a single heavy boot found the top cellar stair, and the old wood screamed their location into the silence like a confession. Dongwoo put one hand flat on Martina's shoulder and pressed her gently but firmly back against the coal wall. Then he waited. There is a particular stillness that men trained for close combat carry in their bodies like a second skeleton. Not tension, but its opposite, a complete and patient emptiness that arrives only when the body has accepted what is about to happen and stopped arguing with it. Dongwoo found that stillness now, standing in the dark beside a 10-year-old girl, in a flour-dusted cellar beneath a bakery, wearing a destroyed suit that had cost more than most people's cars. He found it without difficulty. It had never really left him. The second boot found the stair. Then the third step. Then the flashlight beam swept the bottom landing and found nothing because Dongwoo had already calculated the angle of the beam from the sound of the descent and moved them both 2 feet to the left of where the light would reach. When the mercenary stepped off the final stair, Dongwoo was already behind him. One strike, precise, economical, the kind that carries no anger and requires none. The man folded and went down, and Dongwoo caught him on the way to the floor so the landing made no sound worth hearing. He looked up. Martina was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, not fear, not admiration exactly, but the careful, cataloging attention of someone filing information away for later use. He found, oddly, that he didn't mind being studied by her anymore. He took the mercenary's radio and tactical tablet and spent 4 minutes moving through intercepted communications the way he had once moved through enemy territory, methodically, without reaction, building the picture. His brother's operation was broader than he'd calculated, which meant someone with federal clearance had been feeding his brother intelligence, and Dongwoo filed that question away without answering it because some threads you pull later and some you pull now. What he pulled now was this: the gala, tonight. The city's grand museum, black tie, 200 of the most powerful people in the Harbor Development Consortium gathered to witness his brother announce the merger and sign the acquisition into permanence. He looked at Martina. She was already 3 pages into the ledger, her finger tracing a line of text he recognized as the Shell Company documentation. When she looked up, it was with an expression he had not seen on her face before, not the careful steadiness she had worn all night, but something colder and more final. The particular smile of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a door to open and has just heard the lock turn. "It's time to go to a party," she said. "I know exactly what to bring." They came up out of the cellar into the cool night air, and 4 unmarked vehicles closed around them from every direction simultaneously, and the men stepping out were not his brothers. Their badges caught the streetlight as they rose. Martina stepped forward before Dongwoo could speak. She addressed the federal director the way her grandmother must have addressed every powerful man who ever underestimated her, directly, without performance, with the ledger already open to the page she needed. She didn't ask for protection. She presented terms. The money laundering logs, the Shell Company documentation, the harbor land deeds, and the recorded communications from the tactical tablet, all of it organized and cross-referenced in a dead woman's handwriting, offered in exchange for one thing: an escort to the museum tonight before the ink dried on a stolen empire. The director looked at the ledger for a long time. Then he looked at Martina. Then he made a call. 3 hours later, Martina sat in the back of a federal vehicle in a clean dress Dongwoo's escort had sourced without being asked, her cornrows still intact, her grandmother's ledger on her lap, watching the museum's grand entrance materialize through the rain-streaked window. Inside, through the tall lit windows, she could see the shapes of chandelier light and the movement of elegant people who did not yet know that the ground beneath everything they were celebrating had already shifted. She wondered briefly whether any of them had known all along, whether the corruption in that room went deeper than one brother's ambition. She stored the question where she stored all questions that mattered, quietly, for later. The oak doors of the grand ballroom opened, and Kim Dongwoo walked through them. The room didn't silence all at once. It happened in a wave, table by table, as heads turned and recognition traveled through the crowd like current through water. His brother, standing at the podium mid-sentence, looked up and turned the color of old ash. The champagne glass in his hand tilted without him noticing, and the woman beside him reached over and steadied it with the automatic reflex of someone accustomed to managing disasters in real time. Dongwoo walked the center aisle without hurry, flanked by federal agents on either side, his posture carrying none of the cold authority he had worn on his own driveway that morning. What he carried now was different, quieter, The bearing of a man who has been broken open and has not yet decided what to rebuild, but knows, at minimum, what he will not rebuild it from. He reached the stage. The room held its breath. And then Kim Dong-woo stepped to the side, clasped his hands in front of him, and bowed his head. The cameras found her immediately. A 10-year-old girl in a clean dress walking up the stage steps alone, holding a weathered leather ledger above her head with both hands, her beads catching the chandelier light, her grandmother's life's work raised before 200 witnesses like a verdict that had always been coming. The wickedness is being exposed in front of the whole world right now. Subscribe and share this video to stand with Martina as she delivers everything this corrupt empire deserves. At the podium, his brother's hand moved to the inside of his tuxedo jacket, and every federal agent in the room drew their weapon at once. He never got the weapon clear. 3 agents moved on him before his hand finished its motion, and the takedown was swift and without ceremony, the polished marble floor of the grandest ballroom in the city receiving Kim Dong-woo's brother the way justice receives the proud, without gentleness and without apology. His screams of outrage rang through the vaulted ceiling and dissolved into the stunned silence of 200 witnesses who would spend the rest of their lives deciding how much they had known and when. Federal teams moved through the room with quiet efficiency, and within the hour, the architecture of an empire built on other people's erasure had been reduced to evidence bags and zip ties and men in expensive suits sitting on curbs in the rain. Martina stood at the podium and said nothing. She didn't need to. The ledger was already in federal hands, and every camera in the room had already sent her grandmother's careful, meticulous handwriting out into the world, where it could not be burned. She looked out at the room, and for just a moment, something crossed her face that was not triumph and not relief, but something older and quieter than either. The particular piece of a person who has carried a thing a very long way and has finally set it down in the right place. 6 months later, spring came to the neighborhood the way spring comes to places that have survived long winters, not loudly, but with the particular insistence of life that has decided to continue. The cranes were gone from the harbor. In their place, a building rose that was wide and bright and unhurried, its courtyard already busy with children who ran across the new pavement with the unself-conscious freedom of kids who have never been told this ground might be taken from them. Above the entrance, in letters that caught the morning light, was a name that the neighborhood had chosen unanimously and without debate. Dong-woo walked down the new sidewalk in a plain linen suit, his hands in his pockets, his neck tattoos the only remaining evidence of the man he had been. He had spent 6 months giving testimony, liquidating holdings, and signing over what the courts directed him to sign. He had not found it as difficult as he expected. Some things, once you have seen them clearly, become impossible to hold on to. He found Martina in the courtyard, sitting on a stone bench with a brand new leather sketchpad across her knees, drawing the magnolias coming into bloom along the garden wall. She didn't look up when he sat beside her. She added a petal. He looked at the children playing, at the building bearing her grandmother's name, at the neighborhood that had refused to disappear, and asked her quietly whether she ever still felt the darkness of everything that had happened pressing in. Martina looked up from her sketchpad. She watched the children for a moment, her beads still, the spring light moving across her face. "When you know who you are," she said, "the darkness doesn't stay. It finds out it's in the wrong place and it leaves." Dong-woo nodded slowly and sat with that, and understood that the most sovereign power he had ever encountered in his life had been crouching behind a garden planter in a yellow dress, holding a dead woman's book, waiting patiently for justice to catch up to the truth. The camera pulls back. The courtyard fills the frame, the children, the magnolias, the name above the door, the old man and the little girl sitting quietly together in the warm spring light. And then, gently, the world fades to black.